In there, hang in there. Okay, so we're about to start on a new guy. This guy is the what we call the optimist of sociology. I'll give you guys an account of what this guy has to offer us. And by the way, at the end of today, you will be assigned a homework assignment. So make sure to get that information down so you can actually prepare for the assignment. And not just that, but also for what's coming up eventually on Thursday. There are quizzes next week on uh, Tuesday next week. And so it's all going to be dependent on whether you'll be here on Thursday. So we'll cover the homework assignment on Thursday along with the rest of the discussion that still is going to be left over. Okay, so make sure to be here for that. You look like you got a smile on your face. I'm not sure what that's supposed to be about. No, nothing. Okay. All right. So, yes, sir. The quiz is in terms of the reading material, yeah, but I've gotten so much from the other chapters where, yeah, everything else we'll talk about. Yeah. The slides will not be online. Okay, anything else? Any more? No? Okay, so, the VP debate is tonight, so who's going to be watching? Is this like at 6? 6 o'clock? Yeah. All right, so I don't think I'm going to let you guys go sooner than 6, so I'm going to be keeping it until the very last second, I think. So, I really wish I could, and I'm going to try everything I can to get you guys out of here as soon as possible, because I want to watch it too. So let's do the best we can with this, okay? So the discussion we have coming up for us today is a discussion by this guy, a guy named Emil Durkheim. Emil Durkheim is going to be known as the optimist of sociology. This guy's going to offer us an interesting perspective, a perspective that's going to really show, or at least shed light on how societies work, and much more importantly, why it is that we should have a greater appreciation for the fact that we live in the modern times. So let's see what Durkheim has to offer us, and why his view can actually be seen, or at least be offered as means for us to kind of look upon modern societies in a far more positive way, a way that essentially doesn't necessarily need for us to get to with the kind of revolution that Marx was actually promising us. So this guy, Emil Durkheim, was actually the reason for why I even got into sociology. He'll write his most famous book, titled Suicide. We'll be talking about that in chapter 6. I'll explain what this is about. That work of his is what actually got me into sociology to begin with. So I'll explain why and so on. I had a family member who committed suicide, so I always wanted to know why. I couldn't understand it until I read his book, and it really shed light on the idea of why indeed something like this could actually happen. But until we get to his very, very famous book on suicide, let's talk about his overall theories. Theories that essentially are going to be used in a manner as means to maybe counter-argue the Marxian view, but we'll also see it actually goes and becomes very compatible with the Marxian view as well. Emile Durkheim, a Frenchman who follow in the French tradition of sociology. By the way, he was the first professional sociologist. He was the first professional teacher, professor, I should say, teaching sociology at a university level. So all the while, this guy would essentially earn these kinds of titles as far as the first professor and so on. He still is going to offer us some interesting views for us to consider. For one, he's going to come from the Auguste Comte tradition. Auguste Comte, if you guys remember the founding father of sociology, is going to give us a theory that he's going to find to be way too vague. He's going to say the Comtean theory is really general, really vague. You can't even find yourself as an individual in this model. It really says very little about how societies work because it concentrates way too much on the very macro level and not enough on the micro level in sociology. And I'll explain what it means by this eventually coming up. But he also criticizes Karl Marx. He criticizes Karl Marx for being way too materialistic. So Durkheim is going to come back. He's going to say Marx is materialism is unnecessary, or at least not enough for it to actually be encompassing enough as far as its ability to explain how societies work. I mean, remember how Marx was talking about how we should only embrace the idea of material stuff in society, right? Marx dismissed the idea of religion and mostly referred to it as simply an opiate of the masses, if you guys remember, right? So Durkheim is going to come about and is going to say, you can't just simply be doing stuff like that. You can't just simply dismiss things in society just because you don't find them to be essentially easily to be fit into your theory. You can't just simply be doing that. So Durkheim is going to say everything in society exists for a reason, and because it does so, you have to understand what purpose it is that they serve in society. Religion certainly talks about a lot of stuff that we can never prove. This is true. Remember how Marx referred to the idea of religion as simply false ideas and false perceptions, right? So Durkheim is going to say it is true that we can't prove what religion has to offer us is to essentially be true, but we can actually refer to them not so much as facts, but rather as social facts. This says if we can convert all things into society into social facts, we can indeed understand how they all serve a function in society. Now, what does it mean by a social fact? God, for example, in the concept of religion, is not a fact. No one can prove that God actually exists. However, God is a social fact. How so? I can't prove that there is a God. No, neither you can. But I can prove that you believe that there is a God. As long as I can prove that you believe there is a God, God becomes a social fact. What does this mean? I cannot say that there is God, but as long as you believe in that there is God, this could shape your behavior. This could shape how you essentially manage your behavior, versus if you don't believe there is God, right? That could also shape how you manage your behavior also. So how you manage your behavior can be determined by a social fact in this case, not necessarily a fact, but rather a social fact. What does Durkheim mean by this? Durkheim means that essentially if we convert all things in society into social facts, then we get to incorporate all of them in a much more thorough, in a much more encompassing theory that can eventually be converted to essentially a theory that becomes essentially much more able to actually explain simply all of what goes on in society, unlike Marx, which what he simply referred to as a very limited and simply a materialistic theory. So armed with this kind of reasoning, Durkheim is going to come about and is going to ask his most grand question. The question he's going to ask is this. It is, what holds societies together? What holds societies together? The original question was actually, what promotes social solidarity? In other words, what keeps societies together? Now, why is he asking this question? This is actually an introverted Marxian question. Imagine how Marx was actually making this case. He was saying society is going to eventually fall apart. He talked about this in the form of capitalism, and he said capitalism eventually is going to collapse, right? So Durkheim is asking the question, is actually addressing the Marxian point in a different way. He's saying for us to collapse, we have to be in place in some manner, right? Imagine if I say this building is going to collapse, right? This building must be here for it to collapse, right? So if Marx is going to say, so capitalism is going to collapse, Durkheim is going to say, well, what's been keeping it together in all this time for it to collapse? So, to explain what keeps societies together, where collapse could eventually become an option, in the way one is to actually develop a theory to explain it. Marx did this, right? So Durkheim is going to say, let's now essentially explain what keeps modern societies together. Let's now explain what keeps modern organic societies together. Durkheim is very careful in the very idea of how he's to play the Marxian game. He knows that if he refers to our society as indeed a capitalist society, he knows in the very end he'll be eating out of Marx's hands. So to make sure he doesn't play the Marxian game, he says, I'm going to create my own language. I'm going to create my own idea of essentially how to create a theory. And in my theory, I'm going to refer to our modern society simply as an organic society. I will soon explain what it means as to what it means by this. But Durkheim is going to essentially say, if I use this kind of a language, then I get to create a theory that I get to essentially use in a manner as to avoid having to ever fall into the Marxian pitfalls, is what he means. So, he'll study us in our most primitive form. He'll refer to these kinds of societies as mechanical societies. We don't have the time, so I'm not going to address as to what he meant by mechanical societies. But he's going to find a kind of a model in a very important book titled The Religious forms of the elementary forms of the religious life is the book he actually will write, where he'll study primitive societies, and all the while he'll do so, he'll find a kind of an overall framework of how primitive societies hold themselves together, and then eventually he'll use that basic framework to apply it to us modern organic societies. Now, to explain what he means by this, and much more importantly as to what he means by how modern organic societies keep themselves together, let's go and essentially address this very topic. Let's now address the very idea of what he means by referring to modern societies simply as organic societies. To refer to modern societies as organic societies, Durkheim says, we must think of societies as though they're simply like organisms. Think of any organism. Let's go with something more familiar to us. Let's go with the human organism. Think of how the human organism essentially keeps itself together. Look at how the entirety of the organism works. Look at this. We got the brain. The brain in the organism does the very complex work of controlling the entirety of the body. No, the thought process part of the brain is a small part of the brain. The brain is busy doing far more important things, like controlling how your heart beats, controlling how your lungs work, controlling how your stomach digests stuff, and everything else, right? So the brain is busy doing all these very complex controlling strategies that are involved in the body. But the brain by itself is useless. It needs to be able to stay alive. So to stay alive, it needs two main things. It needs oxygen and it needs nutrients. To get oxygens, the brain needs to actually get oxygens that are converted into oxygen cells in the lungs, right? To get nutrients, it needs nutrients that are digested and turned into nutrient cells in the stomach. To get it to the brain, you need to do so through the blood, right? Your blood has to take the oxygen cells and the nutrient cells into your brain to feed it. In order to do so, you need the heart. The heart needs to pump in a manner as to take the blood into your brain to keep the brain alive. But then again, for the blood to do its part, it's for it to be able to essentially convert oxygens and nutrient cells into usable cells that the body can actually make use of, you need to put food into your stomach. How do you do so? You need to have legs to run to your food, you need to have hands to catch your food, and you need to be able to consume it and so on. In this sense, the entire organism works together to contribute to the functionality of society in that sense. So Durkheim says society is a lot like an organism. Organisms that essentially work in a manner where the work itself in that organism is divided amongst many parts. The brain part in the organism is kind of like, in society, would be kind of like the government, right? The government is busy controlling the entirety of society, making sure that all aspects of society work functionally together to make sure that every part works appropriately with one another. But then again, the government by itself is unable to do any of that stuff that it does without essentially, let's say, the economy. The economy is kind of like the heart, right? The heart is certainly an important part. The economy is certainly an important part. It's able to transfer money through society in a way as to make sure every aspect of society gets a share of it, right? But then again, the heart, if you will, the economy, if you will, simply couldn't actually do all this stuff if it's not for us to be able to actually return to work to contribute to that economy. For us to return to work, we need to be fed. That's like the food industry. We need to be sheltered and so on. So we need to be offered all these very basics in a manner as for us to essentially be able to return to contribute to the economy. So the food industry comes to contribute to our feeding. The shelter industry comes to contribute to the idea of offering us dwelling, right? The police, the military, often kind of like the muscles in the body, right? All these very many parts of the organisms, all these very many parts of society work together in a manner as for all labor to be divided amongst all these very many institutions. Hence, society, just like the organism, is divided amongst these very many institutions in a manner as for them all to contribute to the solidarity of society. In a sense, Durkheim is offering us a much more encompassing theory versus Marx. Why? If Marx was talking about the idea of addressing society as the economy, which was capitalism, right? Durkheim is saying, yeah, the economy is important, of course, but the economy is only one part of the organism. It's kind of like the heart. So if you concentrate on the heart, you can certainly say quite a few things about it, but the heart by itself is useless. It's worthless. It doesn't say anything about how society works. So Durkheim is going to say, we have to understand how that heart, the economy, works with the rest of the society in a manner as to contribute to the function functionality of all society altogether. And if we were to do so, we'd understand that society is made up of the division of labor. The division of labor is situated in a way where labor, work, becomes divided amongst every institution in society, where all of them become specialized institutions, where not one institution by itself would ever be able to function. Because they by themselves could never function, they all essentially work together under the guise or under the control of the government, if you will. They work together in such a way as for all these very specialized institutions to contribute to the solidarity of society. So much so where not one institution could ever survive apart from the others. Look at the educational institution. All it does is educate us. Because all it does is essentially to educate us, it in itself could never survive without all other institutions doing their part. This institution couldn't survive if we didn't actually pay taxes. Government collects taxes, right? All the while it does. So it collects it from us, the rest of the workers, right? We collect taxes from the workers through the government, and we use it to finance something like an institution, like this education institution. In the very end, these very many institutions, all of them work together just like the organism. And all the while they work together just like the organism, they essentially become forced to come together and to stick together. So Durkheim says, if we were to think of societies as an organism, where all labor in that society is divided amongst many, many specialized institutions, we'd understand how it is that all these institutions come to interdepend on one another. They come to interdepend on one another as for them to be forced to come together and to stick together. So if Marx was making the case that we're going to collapse, Durkheim says we won't let any collapse happen. Why? Our interdependence in our society will force us to come together and to stick together. Let's say if a Marxist was to bring up the case and say, take a look at what happened with the recession, right? The recession hit us and we weren't doing well. The Durkheimians would say, yes, of course that's true. The recession was kind of like very much a downgrading of society in our economy. We certainly experienced that. That was kind of like the heart. But all the while the heart was not doing well, all the while the economy was not doing well, what do? We cut from every aspect of society. We eventually contribute to the economy in such a way as for us to get better. It's kind of like the organism. The organism was sick. It was. But all the while it was sick, we cut from other parts of the organism, we cut from other parts of society as to contribute to that part altogether. So much so where we're back now. Look at the economy. It's recovered significantly. Yeah, we're nowhere close to being absolutely excellent, but all the while that's true, we have recovered, and we have recovered quite well. So Mr. Durkheim, Mr. Marx, Durkheim is going to say, the case is made about the idea of how we're going to collapse. There's a reason for why that hasn't happened. It hasn't happened because you're not thinking of society in an appropriate way. If you were to think of society as an organism, you'd understand how all these organisms, all these institutions, by interdepending on one another, they become forced to come together and stick together. Through that level of interdependence, we won't let us collapse. Mr. Marx, you have an incomplete model. Your model concentrates way too much on the economy, material stuff, the heart, and not enough on every other part of society. Because if you were to think of society in a much more encompassing and complete way like this, then you'd understand why we haven't collapsed in all this time. The division of labor in society, all these institutions where they all depend on one another for them to maintain their functionality, force each other to come together and stick together. If one ends up not doing well, the rest ends up essentially making cuts for themselves to essentially keep up that part along the way. Hence, we can't collapse. Only if you're to think of us simply as an organic system. This is an attack on Marx. An attack that simply says the entirety of your whole theory is simply useless. It offers us nothing constructive whatsoever. It offers us nothing meaningful whatsoever. Mr. Marx, it says, if you're making your entire point is to essentially say that capitalism is going to collapse, there is a reason for why this hasn't happened, because you simply do not have a very encompassing theory to begin with. We can't collapse. We won't let a collapse happen. Only if you were to think of us as an organic system. Then you'd understand why it hasn't happened in all this time. I remember back when the recession hit, so many Marxists I knew, they were like, yep, it's happening, it's happening, it's happening, it's going to come down, it's going to come down, it's going to come down, and it didn't. Durkheim says there's a reason for why that is the case. It's because we didn't let that happen. We depend on the economy way too much to let it just drag us all down with it. We'll make cuts from the rest of society as to contribute to that aspect of society, the economy, as to bring it up also along the way. We can't collapse. We won't collapse. We won't let that happen. Says Durkheim. Now, if you're Marx, you're being challenged, and if you're being challenged, you got to answer Durkheim back at this point. Durkheim has a view of society that says things are looking pretty good. Even if they're not looking good, they're still not looking good. Just like the organism. When we get sick, what happens to us? We recover from it. I'm sick right now. In the next couple of days, I think I'll be well. I'll recover from this. It's not going to let me die. If you're Marx, you got to come back at him, and you got to come back at him with an adamant effort to essentially make the case that indeed this very case that Durkheim is making is not an appropriate observation. So, here comes the Marxian counter-argument. Taking off my Durkheim mask and the way I've tried to represent him, now I'm going to put on my Marx mask on. Mr. Durkheim, this is Marx talking now. Let me get this straight. You're saying that if we think of society as an organism, Marx is saying, then we would understand why we haven't collapsed in all this time. Okay, fine. Then answer me this. What is one absolute fact about all living organisms? They all die. So if you make the case that capitalism cannot collapse because it's an organic system, guess what then? The very nature of organisms guarantees that they're going to collapse. Yes, capitalism is an organic system, but it's an old man organism. It's an old man organism that has suffered 2 major heart attacks. When I say 2 major heart attacks, what do you guys think I'm talking about? The Great Depression and the Great Recession. 2 major heart attacks the system has suffered. And all the while it has suffered from those 2 major heart attacks, this system has become essentially reduced to a point where it's unable to function. In fact, this system has become reduced to a point where half of it has become simply dysfunctional. Half the body, half the organism has simply become left dysfunctional. Now, some of you guys might listen to this and say, where do you get that half from? Right? I mean, like, what does that mean? Where do you get that number from, that half? In fact, the number where I get this from, that half when I say this, actually is not a random statement. It's actually quite a precise statement. In fact, to introduce the idea of where I get that half concept from, I'll remind you guys of what happened with us over about 4 years ago. Who remembers the last presidential election 4 years ago between Obama and Romney? Obama and Romney. Remember, Romney was caught at a secret meeting. He had a bunch of millionaires and millionaires where he had made a statement about it was known as the 47% statement. You guys remember that comment he made? It was known as the 47% type of comment. It was a comment Romney had made amongst a bunch of millionaires and billionaires, where he said that 47% of Americans can no longer care for themselves, enough so where they become dependent on the government. 47% of Americans have become essentially so dependent on the government that they simply cannot live a life of independence for themselves. Now, Mr. Romney was making that case in a manner as to suggest that we got to go get these people, we got to get them off the government, and so on, in a manner as to essentially give ourselves tax cuts. He was kind of making the statement in that manner. But all the while he may have had this kind of intention, the fact of the matter still stands. 47%, that's about half. Can we agree on that? It's about half. Half the people, the statement still stands, is that half the people can no longer care for themselves, so they've become dependent on the government in some manner or another. Marx would look at that and say, take a look at that. Half the people in our society cannot really be able to function fully on their own. Why? Often painted a picture of as though it's a failure in those people. Marxists would say, no, it's a failure in an economic system that's unable to utilize half of its people. Capitalism is an old man organism, and it's dying. It's dying so quickly where it's unable to keep half of its people functional. This one estimate came out recently. It was by Pew Research. I don't know if I told you guys about this. It asked, if you got hit by an emergency and you need to drop $400, where would you get the money from? Did I tell you guys about this? Where would you get the money from? $400. You need to drop it. It's an emergency right now. Half of Americans, 50%, said either they would borrow it or they have no idea where they would get that kind of money. The same question was put in the form of $1,000. If you were hit by an emergency and you have to drop $1,000, where would you get that kind of money from? 75% of Americans said they either would borrow it or they have no idea where they would get it from. 75% of Americans do not even have $1,000 saved up to drop for an emergency. Marxists would look at that and say, that's not a society that's functioning healthy. That's an old man organism that is slowly dying out. An economy, a society that is unable to keep half of its body functional is certainly not a functional society. Instead, you have another organism, little baby boy socialism. Little baby boy socialism is as organic as old man capitalism. It's got a brain, the government. It's got a heart, the economy. It's got the stomach, the food industry. It's got the intestines, the waste management industry. It's got the muscles, right? That's the police or the military. And it's got all the organic parts in the same way as capitalism does. But unlike capitalism, little boy socialism here has got a long life ahead of himself. A long life ahead of himself. A long life. Where this new organism that we call socialism is able to essentially maintain its functionality by valuing all of its body parts equally, or rather equitably. Unlike capitalism, who was disregarding half of its organism by saying, oh, screw this, oh, cut this, right? Socialism says, I can't be doing that. Socialism says, yeah, I have people that are not necessarily doing as important work as others, but I get to value them equitably anyway. I mean, ask yourselves this very question in an organic manner, and I'll convert this into a more social manner. Certainly we can all agree that your fingers are less important than your brain. We could agree that your hand is less important than your heart. But when was the last time you said, well, these fingers are less important than all the other body parts, so whatever, let me cut them off anyway. When was the last time you guys said that? Why not? You can live without your fingers. You can live without your hand. You can live without your legs. Why not cut them off? Why not say, oh, they take all this valuable nutrients, so let me cut them off just because I can. Why not? What's that? Yeah, you need them, but they're not as important as your heart and your brain. Without your brain, you won't survive, but your fingers you can. So why not? Why don't we cut them off? Kinda, because you're not crazy, man. You're not crazy is why you wouldn't do that. Capitalism is crazy. Capitalism says half of my people, I don't need them. I get to chop them up and throw them away. Socialism says that's insane. That's crazy. How do you go about to manage a society where you get to say half of my people are useless to me? So socialism says I value everyone equitably. In a capitalist system, a janitor would be seen as a worthless person. In a socialist system, a janitor would be seen as a worthy person. You know why? Socialism says we got to pay him a living wage. I know somebody coming from a capitalist view, they don't think that people like this are actually worth it. A capitalist will stand in your face and say, if you haven't got the skills, you are not worthy. They will say it in your face. A socialist says that's insane. People of lower skills still are important, and you got to pay them a living wage. You know why you got to pay them a living wage? Because you got to think of them not simply just as individuals, but rather as people that belong in collectivities like families. When paying that janitor 50, 60 grand a year, which certainly would be enough to make a living wage out of it, that janitor isn't just taking that money for themselves. That janitor is taking that money for their family, for their kids. To offer them an income like that also means for them to afford to live somewhere nice, somewhere okay. To live somewhere okay also means to allow your kids an opportunity to thrive. Unlike in capitalism, where we say the janitor isn't worth it, but what we don't say with that is that, well, his kids or her kids should get to suffer along with them also. It's insane. It's insane to punish children who've done nothing at all to have a lifestyle of a lowly type. So socialism says, to make sure that their kids don't suffer, you got to offer them benefits. A living wage, housing help if they need it, child care, health care, education, transportation, provide them with those big expenses so that their incomes become freed from paying for those things. When their incomes are freed from paying for those things, those kids who have done nothing at all to have a lifestyle of a lowly type because their parents are, let's say, less educated, could eventually launch off of this situation and thrive into something more. Capitalism thinks of the janitor as worthless. Socialism says, no way, there's potential there. Yeah, that person, the janitor, might not amount to a whole lot, but their kids might. So you got to offer them resources. Why? Resources that essentially make it possible for them to thrive. Resources you get to tax the rich with and offer it to the poor in the form of indeed those resources. Hence, by pushing towards greater equality is where you're able to essentially have a healthy organism. Unlike in capitalism, where it values everyone so unequally. It says some are important, the rest, well, screw them all. So yeah, Mr. Durkheim, I'll work with you. I refer to society as an organic one. Capitalism is an organic system, and it's dying. It's slowly dying. And instead, you've got a different organic system called socialism. And it's thriving. It's growing. It's offering a quality life and standard of living no one can match. You know why? Because it's able to value everyone in that society equitably. The same way as you would never disregard your fingers and your hands and your legs even though you could live without them. Socialism says, I get to do the same thing. I get to value everyone in my society in the same way. So, Mr. Durkheim, Marx is going to say, you're really not making a case against me. If anything, you're making a case for me. Who thinks Durkheim is making the better argument that if we think of society, we can understand why we can't collapse? Who thinks Marx is making a better argument where it says that if you think of society as an organism, then you understand how we in fact will collapse. And therefore, to delay the collapse at the least is to value the organism much more equitably. One more time. Yeah, that's everybody. This Marxist in this classroom. All right, so that's Marx counter-arguing Durkheim. However, Durkheim is actually going to show his optimism in this next part coming up. Check this out and get a feel of how Durkheim essentially is going to offer a theory that's going to make him look like really the true optimist in our discipline. Here comes Durkheim. Durkheim is going to say, because society becomes made up of these very complex institutions that work together in a manner as for all institutions to interdepend on one another, really a division of labor is what Durkheim calls it. He says, these societies become very, very, very complex. By becoming so very complex, you and I, as individuals, go to work in them. And we go to work in these institutions simply as specialized laborers. Imagine, is there anyone here that you know of at all that can at all run all of society altogether? That's impossible. There's no way that that's possible. The only thing we can all do simply is to be specialized laborers. Look at what I do. I'm a specialist. I teach in the entirety of my day, right? Because this is what I do as a specialist. I spend all of my day essentially teaching. Because I do so, my labor by itself does not really create the other things in my life I need. So, in order for me to have food, my labor doesn't actually create this, I need you, the specialist, to make me food. But I need more than just food. In order for me to have shelter, I'll need you, the specialist, to make me shelter. I remember, you're so busy making food where that's all you're doing. You're so busy making shelter that that's all you're doing. You too are specialists. So if you need food to survive, you go to her. If you need shelter to survive, you go to her. I, as a specialist, I'm so busy doing what I do that I need transportation, so I come to you. You're so busy making me transportation that you, as a specialist, you're too busy making what you're doing and less busy making food, so you go to her. Shelter, you go to him. Education, you come to me. So in this case, as a specialist, I become limited in my activity in my daily situations. Because I become limited in this manner, Durkheim is going to say, I become dependent on many specialized laborers. The entirety of my life pushes me to essentially depend on many people. Because I'm going to depend on so very many people, my life becomes structured in the following way. Now imagine, I'll use a generic example that'll, I think, make quite a bit of sense. Let's say, if you were to work at a place like, I don't know, Vaughn's, what would you potentially be doing at a place like Vaughn's? What would be one job you'd be doing there? A cashier. Can you alone as a cashier run the entirety of Vaughn's by yourself? No. You need many other people that contribute to it, right? Many other specialists. You're one specialist, but you alone can't run this. So you need the cashier on this one end, who's also a specialist. The cashier on that other end, who's also specializing in only cashiering, right? The cashier on this end, and maybe the cashier on that end. But that's not enough. You also need the manager over there to make sure things are running smoothly. You also need the butchers. You also need the dairy people. You also need the people who stock the aisles. You also need the janitors. You also need the bag boys and the bag girls. All these specialists, all of them come together under the shelter called Vaughn's, and they all work together to contribute to the institution of Vaughn's. Now you, in order for you to maintain your functionality, you now find yourself to essentially be able to do so by maintaining many group memberships. You end up maintaining so many group memberships, so much so where by the time you go from having to deal with this one cashier on this one end, the cashier on that one end, the cashier on this other end, the manager here, the butcher there, the dairy people here, and so on, you find out that you end up actually having to maintain the functionality of your life, and this is your place of work, by maintaining these very many group memberships. So much so where none of those groups are groups that you belong in any kind of an entire manner, in any kind of a significant manner. This isn't just true at your place of work. This is also true at your place of home. This is also true at your place of school. You belong to so many groups where by the time you go from one group to the next group and the next group and the next group and on and on and on and on, you begin to discover that you no longer belong into any one of those groups in any kind of a significant way. Imagine, this is one group you guys belong in, right? This is one part of the situation you're in. In here, there is essentially some level of control over you, right? Up to about 6 o'clock. Once 6 o'clock hits, right, what will happen with you guys? You'll get up and go. If you get up and go, would I any longer have any more control over you guys? No way. My control over you is limited. On one group you're a part of. You go from one group to another and another. All of them have some level of control over you. But because you have so many groups to belong in, so many group memberships to keep up with, you discover not one group has any kind of significant control over you. Because not one group has any kind of a significant control over you, Durkheim will ask the question, guess what ends up happening with you? Guess who in the very end ends up having to have the entirety of control over your own life? Who in the very end gets to decide on what you want to do next? You. What do you call a society of people where they're able to all essentially decide on how they're to live their lives? How they're going to go from one group to the next and the next and the next to maintain their own functionality? What do you call people who are able to essentially decide on this on their own and by themselves? Free people. Modern societies, by providing us with many group memberships, by the time we go from one to the next and the next and the next and the next, as much as any one of them may have control over us, the control of them is so limited by that essentially so much so that when we go from one to the next and the next and the next, the decision in terms of what it takes to function within all of them becomes essentially determined by us, the person, the free person. We, as a result, become set free. Modern societies set us free. We're free people. All of us are free. We get to decide on what to do in the way it fits us best. If you want to get up and go, can you get up and go? Yeah. Why? Because you're a free person. If you get up and go, would you expect me to come back after you, tackle you down, bring you back in here? No. You know why you wouldn't expect that? Because I'm so busy maintaining my functionality. By the time I go from belonging to one group to the next and next and next, I become too busy with all of that to eventually care about what you're going to do with your life. You want to get up and go? I've got a lot on my plate to deal with. The last thing I want to do is decide on what you want to do with your own life. You want to go? You can go. Why? You're a free person. What's this whole revolution talk about, Mr. Marx? They're kind of going to ask. What's this whole revolution talk about? All of human struggle, all of human society has always been a struggle for freedom. And we've got it. Look at what it's taken in the past for us to have freedom. Look at the types of groups that have been in position. The dominators and the dominated. The oppressors and the oppressed. The oppressors have wanted to oppress others to be able to take resources from them so they can enjoy some freedom. So they don't have to go chasing for those resources by themselves. The oppressed have fought back so they can enjoy what little freedom they themselves have. So this says oppressors and oppressed have both fought towards essentially this idea of freedom. They've struggled to have that. But in the past, what's taken essentially to achieve, which has been through murder, genocide, and slavery, today we all get to enjoy without having to subject anyone to any of those kinds of conditions. What's taken people to draw blood to enjoy, which is freedom. Today, we get to enjoy it without ever having to do any harm unto others. By belonging to the very many group structures we get to be part of, we become freed from any of them having to have any absolute control over us. Because none of them have any absolute control over us, in the end, we all end up having to take control over our own lives. And the best part is that everyone essentially is dealt with in this manner. All of you are essentially so busy living your lives, maintaining the functionality of your lives on your own, where you become far less interested in essentially dealing with me. You become far less interested in essentially dealing with me in a manner as to limit my freedom. So in the end, what it takes for me to live my life gets to be decided on by me. myself. I'm a free person. You're a free person. You're free. You are, and everybody else in here. And everyone else that's not even here. We're all free. No one can tell us what to do. We'll live essentially in the way it fits us best. We'll live by our choices. We have the choice to live in a manner as for us to succeed. We even have the choice to live in a manner as for us to even fail. But that's the beauty of it. Even in our failure, it's beautiful. Because we're essentially free to still fail. I can make my decisions and I can suffer from those decisions. Because I'm the one who made them. Even in failure, it's beautiful. Because we're all able to make decisions on our own, make choices on our own. We're able to do so freely. This is the best of times. Never has history been able to deliver so much freedom as is the case in the now. And you know who will be more free than you guys? Your kids. You know why? Your kids in the next generation will have even more many group membership possibilities. They'll belong into many more possibilities. By belonging to many more, they'll be able to avoid any of the controls from any of the groups that they're a part of, even more so than even you. Therefore, with less controls, they become set free. Not no control. In every group you belong in, there is control. Here's one group you belong in. There is control here, but the control is limited. Once my control over you expires at about 6 o'clock, I no longer have any control over you. What you get to do from that point on to live your life gets to be decided on by you. So you're free. You're the most free people ever in the history of mankind. Enjoy this. Enjoy this. And you know what the best part about it is? You don't have to have a revolution to get there. You're already there. What revolution are you talking about? What fights? What struggles? What are you talking about? You've got what it's always been about, freedom, and you are one. Yes?
How is this a counter-argument to Marx? Because Marx seems to be agreeing with this. He's just saying that it would be better.
Marx doesn't agree with this.
He's not saying that freedom is just something that's sort of easier to have.
Kinda. I like what you're saying. Let's work on that. Are you guys ready for the Marxian counter-argument? Are we off for the Marxian counter-argument at this point? It's a good point you bring up. So, in fact, it is in the immediate sense, certainly a very much a rebuttal towards Marx. It is, because if you make the case that modern societies have been able to achieve for us what has never been possible for us, then you get to eventually embrace the thought that, well, this is already great, so let's protect this instead of wanting to change it. Right? Because Marx is trying to change society, right? He's trying to make it into what he thinks is better, right? Because he finds that the modern situation is not good, so therefore it needs to be made better. So, if you go with the Durkheimian sense, then you have no problem with the modern societies. If you go with the Marxian sense, then you do have a problem with modern society. Because if Durkheim is saying we're not free, then we're free, Marx is going to have to make the case that we're not free. It is a direct attack on Marx. So, kinda. I like what you're saying, but let me work with you. We can start with the not free part. Let's start with that, and maybe let's see if we can work into this the idea of maybe it's not that we're not free, but rather we can be a lot more free, right? Is what you're saying. Okay. Marx is going to come about and is going to say, Mr. Durkheim, here's Marx's counter-argument. Mr. Durkheim, let me get this straight. You're talking about freedom, and you're talking about freedom in a manner as to say, as I go from one group to the next and the next and the next and the next, This way, no one group has any kind of an significant control over me. So even though they might have control over me, between them, they can, through their control, they can tie me to society. But none of them has any absolute control over me. So therefore, they're able to set me free. Hence, definition for freedom. I don't agree with your definition for freedom, Mr. Durkheim. Marx is going to say. I don't agree with your definition. And here's why. To demonstrate the point of how Durkheim is going to, Marx is going to counter-argue Durkheim, I'll have you guys look at the following advertisement I saw. This was done by my bank, and when I saw it the first time, I was like, wow, what an awesome counter-argument Marx could actually make against Durkheim. And it was so beautifully stated that I thought it was just worthy for me to show it to you guys. Check this out. I went to my bank. Suddenly they had this major advertisement right in front of the doorway. And here's what it said. It said, credit card is just another word for freedom. It is, isn't it? You can get a lot of stuff with one of these, huh? This is probably a $50,000 line. I'm not really sure, but I can get a lot of stuff. A lot of doors will open to me if I just go make use of this. I could be pretty free, can't I? I could just go to Vegas right now. I can fly on a plane. I can even have a jet fly me out there. I can just make use of this throughout, and I can enjoy every single bit of what we call freedom. Can't I? I can. My credit card line will allow me to do so. Now, look at the way this says, though. Credit card is just another word for freedom. What is a credit card? What is a credit card? What does it represent? Money, right? But what kind of money? Why doesn't it say money is just another word for freedom? It says credit card is another word for freedom. What kind of money is credit card? Borrowed money. Why would you borrow money? Because you don't have. So money you don't have is another word for freedom. Now, this money you don't have, which is another word for freedom, comes with something, a little bit of thing with this. What is that little bit called with it? Interest. What is interest? It's a penalty for not having money, right? So you're able to borrow money you don't have, pay penalty on top of that, so you can enjoy freedom. Now, you can. But if I was to fly on that jet, make it to Vegas, stay in some of the nicest hotels, and enjoy quite a bit, what would I have to do in order to keep on enjoying these kinds of freedoms? I would have to pay for it. I would have to pay it back. Now, if I go to pay it back, how would I pay it back? I don't print money, so I can't really pay it back with printed money. How would I have to pay for it back? Well, eventually I have to pay it back. How am I going to have to pay it back? By working. So if I go to work, under whose thumb do I get to be essentially under all along the way, all throughout the day? My boss. In the entirety of my day, from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., I get to be essentially working under the thumb of my boss so I can pay these bills that I can't actually finance on my own, which is why I've had to borrow a credit card to enjoy freedom. So long as I'm under the thumb of my boss, whose control am I under in that most important part of the day? In that part of the day when I'm most energized. In the morning all the way to the evening part. The most energized part of my day. Whose thumb do I get to be under that whole time? My boss. Who loves their boss? Chances are, if it wasn't for the fact that you need money, you would probably never ever hang out with your boss. Isn't that true? Now, you might say some of you guys like your bosses. That's certainly possible. Often they're just nice people also. But as much as you might not like them, ask yourselves this. Would you go to work simply for free if it was simply because you like your boss? No. Why do you go to work then? To get paid. Why do you want to get paid? So you can get basic stuff. Basic stuff that you simply need to pay for to enjoy freedom. So therefore you get to be on the thumb of your boss for what reason? Because you are not free. You're not free from debts. You're not free from expenses. Otherwise, why else would you surrender to be under the control of your boss if it's not because you need money? Money you don't have is what's defined as freedom. Hence, Mr. Durkheim, I move to argue a different definition for freedom. A freedom, the concept of it, shouldn't be that you go from one group and another, where none of them have any absolute control over you. It shouldn't be that to be the appropriate definition for freedom, but rather this. Freedom should be defined by money. The more of it you have, the more free you are. The less of it you have, the more you borrow on credit cards. The more you borrow on credit cards, the more you pay interest. The more you pay interest, the poorer you get. The poorer you get, the more you get to go and be under the thumb of your boss in the entirety of your day. People who surrender to be under the thumb of their bosses with people in the company of people whose company they don't even enjoy are not people who are there because they want to be there, are people who are there because they have to be there. Why do you have to go to work? To make money. To make money to do what with? Buy stuff. Buy essentials. Essentially, are you really free? No. You're not free from debts. Money gets you freedom. In a society like capitalism, there certainly are free people. There definitely are. These are the very rich. They can enjoy lots of freedoms. But that's sort of the point. Capitalism delivers freedoms to the few. The majority of us who have to struggle and work every single day, we're far less free. Because we end up having to surrender to be under control of our bosses, people whose company often we don't enjoy. Why do we do that? Because we're not free from debts. We got to pay that stuff back. And paying it back means for us to be under control of our bosses in the entirety of our day. So, if we're to argue that money is the appropriate definition for freedom, then what economic system pays you so well where you don't have to surrender to be under the control of your boss? Louder? How so? Pays more than for your basic necessities. Look at this. Per household would make $54,000 a year as of the year 2013 it was. It's a little more than this. Because of inflation, it's actually gone up slightly more. But look at this. In Norway, they make about twice as much as we do. You haven't got housing? That's provided to you. Childcare is provided to you. Education is provided to you. Healthcare is provided to you. Transportation is provided to you. Those biggest expenses are taken away from your overall paycheck. And on top of that, 100 grand. What would you do with your 100 grand? Maybe save it. Spend it, certainly, but save it also. Eventually, if you save money, enough as for it to accumulate into a nice big bulk, would you need to work all the time? Would you need to be under the thumb of your boss in the entirety of your day? Probably less so. So what would you do with the rest of your time? Spend it with people whose company you enjoy. Spend it with people to maybe go on vacation with while you get paid for it. What would you do if you had money and time on your hands? You'd be spending with people whose company you enjoy. Who would those be? Friends, family. Would your boss be somewhere along on that list? Probably not. But yet you go to your boss. Why? You have to. Because you're not free. You want to be free? You need to be paid well. To be paid well also means to be able to essentially accumulate enough where you don't need to essentially go to work the entirety of your day. You can actually have time to enjoy with people whose company you enjoy. And here's the best part. You get to be paid for it to take time off and actually enjoy their company. 3 weeks out of the year for vacation, and 2 weeks for essentially holiday pay. All paid for so you can essentially hang out with people whose company you enjoy. What economic system delivers you these kinds of freedoms? Louder. Socialism. You want to be free? Be socialist. Here's the best part, Mr. Durkheim. Your version of freedom fits in the socialist model just fine too. Freedom should be defined by access to money and resources. A society that provides that to you, socialism, gives you greater freedoms. Hence, you're freer in socialism than you are in capitalism. Says Marx. Who thinks Durkheim is making the better argument for what qualifies as freedom? Going from one group to another, not being tied down by any one of them. Who thinks Marx is making a better argument for freedom? That we are simply not free from debt, so therefore we become we end up surrendering to the controls of our bosses. Show hands. I see 3 people who are raising their hands. I'm not sure which way we're going. I'm not sure yet. Okay. What do you feel like? It's kind of like it's not making things clearer for you. Not sure. How about you? What do you? I didn't see you raising your hand. So, what's that? Okay. How about you, Miss? I never got her name. Paula? Are you okay? Didn't think you had a headache. Yeah, it looks like it. Have you been paying attention?
Yes.
Okay. Why not Durkheim's definition? With Durkheim also? You got a headache, kind of. Gotcha. All right, I won't press any further. Okay, so Durkheim is making a case of how we're free by belonging to very many groups, where again we're not tied by any one of them. Marx is making the case that we're not free because we're not free from debts, but we can be free in a society that actually gives us freedoms, which is essentially done so through money. Money buys us access to freedoms that allow us to actually enjoy things that we want to do so. Things that we want to do so with people whose company we enjoy. What economic system provides this to us, according to Durkheim, Marx? Socialism, right? So if you want to be more free, you'd have to simply practice the model of socialism. It's simply what Marx would say in response to Durkheim. Now, we're putting the discussion of freedom to a side. We're now going to build on the Durkheimian argument, and all the while we do so, check this out and get a feel of how the Durkheimian argument gets even more optimistic. Look at this, and we'll also see how, of course, Marx is going to come back at him. But until then, look at the optimism of Emil Durkheim and how adamant he is in the idea of thinking of modern societies is actually the best of times. Durkheim is going to say the following. He's going to say, as you and I go to belong to very many groups to maintain the functionality of our lives, right? This is one of the groups we belong to, right? But we belong into so very many groups. We begin to discover the following outcome actually yielded. Here's what we begin to discover. Imagine, I belong into very many groups, right? Because I do so, you guys are one of them. This is one group I've come to. But I just came from Moore Park. I had 3 classes there. In the morning, I had a class at COC, right? On other days, I'm on the main campus at Pierce and so on, right? So these are the basics of what I do on a daily basis. So in this sense, as I go from one group to the next and the next and the next, that's what I do in order to be able to enjoy my freedoms. However, Durkheim says we get more than just freedom by belonging into so very many groups. By belonging into so very many groups, we pick up a bunch of bits and pieces of influences from all of them. Imagine, I come in here, I talk to you guys say something maybe really interesting, and that shapes my perception of things altogether. So I come to you guys to not only be able to enjoy my freedom, but also by hanging out with you guys, I learn something from you. So the combination of people I hang out with and the bits and pieces of influences they leave me with essentially become combined in some unique manner to be found in me in whatever unique manner it can be found in me. You too belong into very many groups also. By the time you go from having to belong from one group to the next and the next and the next and the next, you begin to discover that the bunch of bits and pieces of influences from all those groups become combined in some unique fashion to only be found in you and you only, because you're the only one who connects those group structures together. This becomes true for you also. You too belong into so very many groups, where by the time you end up interacting with them in a manner as for you to pick up on the bits and pieces of influences from all of them, they become found in some unique combination in you and you only in that specific way. So much so, where at the end of the day, what do you and me have in common with one another? Not much. Maybe this group, maybe this situation that we're in, but nothing more than that. What does this mean? This means that by belonging into so very many group structures, the bits and pieces of influences from all of them become essentially found in some unique combination in all of us differently. Because they become found in some unique combination in all of us differently, this gives birth, according to Durkheim, to this very idea of what he calls individuality. Modern societies, by allowing us to belong into so very many groups, that by the time we go to belong into these very many groups, the bits and pieces of influences from all of them become combined in all of us differently, so much so as for all of us to possess unique and different qualities, in a way as for this to give birth to indeed what he calls individuality. Individuality is what we end up actually having to derive out of this. Individuality, therefore, becomes really the quality that in the very end defines the entire person. It's the combination of all qualities that all of us possess that in the very end defines the entire person. Imagine, you could stand there and cite something about one of the qualities I possess. You could say you're a man. I'd be like, yeah, but it's a small part of who I am. You could say you're heterosexual. Yeah, but it's a small part of who I am. You're a dad. Yeah, but it's a small part of, maybe a lot bigger part of who I am. Yeah, you're a husband. Yeah, but that's a small part of who I am. You're a son. Yeah, it's a small part of who I am. You're a teacher. Yeah, it's a small. No matter what quality you might say might be true, but none of those qualities fully really describe who I am in my entirety. So if you really wanted to get to know who I am, you'd have to know all the qualities and then the way I possess in them in me and me, the person, the individual. Modern societies provide us with so many group possibilities where by the time we really look at how all those qualities become combined, they essentially in the very end become combined in some unique way only in you and you only, the individual. So much so, where when you look around, you begin to notice the very many different qualities we possess make us all absolutely different. And that's beautiful. You know why? Look at what all of whose history has been about. Look at what's going on even right now in the Middle East. You look at what's going on out there even right now. The Shiites and the Sunnis are beheading each other for being different. History has been full of this, where people have simply slaughtered each other for being different. Today in modern societies, where not only are we different from each other, but we're different from each other and we no longer see that as a threat. Look around us. People of different racial backgrounds. People of different ethnic backgrounds. People of different religious backgrounds. People of different sexual orientations, possibly. People of different genders. People of all different qualities. All of us in this small classroom together. And we're not killing each other. We're simply at the least tolerant of one another. Like on some of my main campuses, like I'll find the students who are the Jewish students, the Muslim students, the Christians. I'm like, you guys in other parts of the world, you're killing each other. Look at you. You're actually liking each other. At the least you're tolerating each other. This is beautiful. Because we no longer see us based on that one quality of religiosity. We no longer see us just based on that one quality of race, of ethnicity. Those become a small bit of who you are. In the end, the very idea is that the qualities that we all possess become combined together in some unique fashion to be found uniquely different in all of us. So much so where everyone's different. In the end, differences no longer threaten us. Because if I'm threatened by differences, then everybody's threatening to me. Eventually, I'd become a social isolate. I would hang out with no one at all. So if I want to belong in society, I'd have to deal with you guys. For me to deal with you, I'd have to look beyond those basic qualities you possess. Beyond your sex, beyond your gender, beyond your sexual orientation, beyond your race, beyond your ethnicity, your religion, and so on. I would, in the very end, have to see how all those qualities become combined in the unique ways that actually combine in you, the individual. I'd have to get to know you. If I get to know you, then in the very end, I see the person. No longer the ideology, no longer the gender, no longer the sex, no longer any of those qualities by themselves, but actually the full person. You know that Martin Luther King speech? I have a dream. I have a dream that one day I'll be actually valued for more than just my skin color, or something along those lines is what he said. This is what he was talking about. I have a dream that one day you can see me for more than my skin color, that you can see me for the person that I am. Although we have a long way to go, still look at us. Look at how racially diverse we are. We're able to go beyond those very, very basic shallow qualities and able to see essentially each other for the person that is there, and not just the skin color. This is beautiful. This is great. We're headed somewhere beautiful, where everybody's different. Everybody's got qualities that simply set them apart from everyone else, where no one quality fully defines the entire person. Name any quality about me you want. None of it fully defines who I am. None of it. I'm far more than any of those things you see. In the end, if you really want to pass a judgment about me, it would have to be about my personal qualities that you'd only have to be able to actually pass about because you get to know me. Isn't that the point in the very end? To be able to be seen for the person that's here versus all these restricting qualities that historically have been put before us as means to separate us? This is beautiful. Look around. Diversity is beautiful. We get to learn from each other. We get to experience perspectives that we by ourselves would have never experienced. We get to learn. We get to get better. We become more full humans. Perhaps the best part about Durkheim, what he has to say, is the part that we not only no longer are threatened by our differences, but we actually go to celebrate our differences. What does he mean by this? He says, we don't just only get to enjoy individuality, we get to enjoy what he calls moral individuality. What does it mean by this? Durkheim talks about an unhealthy individuality. He calls this egoism. And when referring to this as egoism, he says, some of us belong to so very many groups where eventually we'll live for no one else at all, we'll live for ourselves. He says, this becomes an unhealthy type, where we become the center of our lives and so on. He says this is an unhealthy type, and it could actually be quite dangerous. Durkheim, though, says there's a much healthier type of individuality. One he calls moral individuality. What does he mean by this? Here's what he means by this. Imagine, you guys are one of the groups I belong to. I come to you to escape controls from the other ones. So I come to you to enjoy my freedom. And I pick up through interactions with you, I pick up a bunch of bits and pieces of influences from you as for it to help me shape my character. So in time, my character will change as well. So that says I come to you to enjoy my freedom and my individuality. So, let's say coming up on Thursday, I come here and I go to treat you in a very disrespectful fashion. What would you do? You'd probably be upset. What else would you do? I'd probably treat me the same, make me leave, file a complaint, and rightfully you should. Right? Now, if you do that, if I do this, look what's happening. I'm turning you off to me. Not just that, but I'm also setting a very bad tone to everyone else. Which means that if I'm going to treat you in such a way, you leave. Remember, you're a free person. You don't have to deal with my BS, right? You can easily leave, right? So because you leave, you can take away this group membership I have with you. If you take away this group membership along with my group membership to everyone else in here, right? If you take that away from me, then you take away a piece of my freedom and a piece of my individuality. So if I really want to enjoy my freedom and individuality, how am I going to have to treat you? How am I going to have to treat her? With respect. I have to be nice to you. I have to be respectful towards you. I have to be moral towards you. You're different from me, and your differences not only are not threatening to me, but I have to actually treat you with respect for those differences. For you to say, hey, that guy, I don't even know him, but he's worthwhile. If you stick around and say he's worthwhile because I'm treating you with kind and respectful gesture, you give me this group membership. And for you to give me this group membership is for you to allow me to escape the controls from the other groups to enjoy my freedom and my individuality. So if I want to enjoy my freedom and individuality, I have to do more than just simply tolerate you for your differences. I actually have to treat you with respect for those differences. Latino, black, white, Asian American, doesn't matter. Those qualities no longer restrict me from actually being respectful towards you. Muslim, Jew, Christian, Buddhist, Hindu, it doesn't matter. Those qualities no longer hinder me from actually having to treat you with respect. Why? Because you're free. You can leave. If you leave, you take away a piece of my freedom and individuality. For me to enjoy it, I have to look beyond that. Beyond those restricted qualities. And actually get to treat you with respect. Aren't we respectful towards one another? Aren't we? Look around. Look how respectful we are towards each other. Has anyone ever felt offended by anyone in here? At least hopefully not intentionally, right? But we treat each other with respect, don't we? We say, yep, we're different, and there's nothing wrong with it. We can still be nice to each other. Isn't that what this is? Isn't this beautiful? Look at what history has been filled with. If you were black, you got to be a slave. If you were a Latino, you got to do some of the worst jobs available out there. If you were an Asian, you got to be limited to only like railroad tracking or coal mining in areas where whites didn't even want to deal with you. Areas where you're away and really going away. Now it's like, no, we don't want to do that to you. We don't want to restrict you. We don't want to push you away. We want to bring you to us. We don't just want to bring it to us. We want to be able to get to know the person along the way and get to essentially respect you for the very many qualities you possess. This is beautiful. This is great. We get to be different from each other, and we get to be respected for those differences. Look at how politically different we are these days. We're seeing two extremely different candidates compete against one another. And people supporting both sides could be in the same room and they still could be respectful, even though they do have differences amongst each other. At the least, we can be tolerant. And that's the beauty of modern societies. It allows us to be different. And in the process of being different, we get to be respected for those differences. Hence, moral individuality. Another example of what Durkheim means by having an appreciation for the times we live in today. Marx. That's an attack on Marx. So here's the Marxian comeback. Yeah, we are people of different backgrounds hanging out together. This is true. But answer me this. If a job opportunity comes up and you apply for this job, you, and you. Who do you want to have that job? Who do you want to have that job? Who do you want to have that job? Who do you want to have? What's that? Who do you want to have that job? How about you? What do you call a society of people who say, me, 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 me? Selfish. You're not as moral as you think you are. In the end, who do you watch out for? You watch out for the interest of number one. Who's number one to you? Absolutely. In a society of people who say me, 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 they're hardly the moral people you're claiming them to be, Mr. Durkheim, Marx is going to say. Really? We're respected for our differences? Are you paying attention to what's going on in our politics? Are you paying attention? This political movement is actually less about the economy, it's more about race. It's about one group of people to be in rightful position to oppress other racial groups. That's what you guys are seeing done. And this candidate that's actually made it to this point, Mr. Trump, has got there because there's a mass of people that support that view. They don't think that other people of other races are their equals. To refer to an entire race of people as rapists, how respectful is that? To refer to people who put their lives in danger to protect this country and came back with a lot of damage to their psyches as weaklings. How respectful is that? Did you hear the comment from Trump last night? People who suffer from PTSD are weak. Does this sound that this is a movement? I don't just mean the man Trump. I mean the fact that there's a huge support behind it. Does that sound like the support behind a candidate like this is a support for respectability for our differences? No way. Mr. Trump is talking about making America great for one group of people and one group of people only. White, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, men who are heterosexuals. That's not respecting us for our differences. That's disrespecting us for our differences. And that's the very point. His entire slogan is to not be politically correct. What is political correctness? To be respectful for each other's differences. He's saying, I'm not going to respect you for your differences because you're less than me. Again, it's less the man, that's important, and more about how he got there. He got there because we have a mass of people in our society that feel that others of other races are not their equals. Others of other religious backgrounds are not their equals. The man is not important. What's important is the mass of people who support him. And it definitely doesn't sound like we're in a time of in an era where we're really being respected for our differences. Maybe a little more so than in the past. I'm not sure if it's a whole lot more so though. Who's making a good argument for morality? Are we in times of morality, or are we essentially not as moral as Durkheim says? And if we're not as moral, where would we be moral? In what kind of a society would we be moral towards one another? Socialism. Why? Everyone's equal. So why if everyone's equal? So what if everyone's equal? Why would that be towards a path towards morality?
Someone wants to do less to the person.
Yeah.
But example, you said that like you took your child to school, and since other people like handful of money against
right. Think of it this way: you're my equal. If you're my equal, do I have any reason to think you're any less than me to enjoy health benefits than me? Do I think you're any less than me to enjoy housing less than me? To enjoy childcare, education? You're my equal. Because you're my equal, eventually I become far more inclined to want to have you be able to enjoy it from the very basic benefits of society in the way I would want to enjoy from that. What do you call a society of people that say, I don't care who you are in terms of race, sexual orientation, ethnicity, religion, and so on. I want you to have all the basics that I have. What do you call a society of people like this? Moral. So you want to be moral, be socialists. says Marx. All right, your homework assignment is the following. It's a two-part assignment, so make sure to get both. Part one is this chart. To plug in key concepts in the way these sociologists are to actually give us their version of their theories about modern society. We talked about Marx, we talked about Weber, we talked about Durkheim. So those are the three main guys we're going to look at. We said that they're sociologists. Remember what sociology is. Go back to your first day of lectures, and we talked about this. It's really about how society creates culture, which is then used to influence the individual person. So, I want you guys to figure out Marx's sociology, right? Weber's sociology, and Durkheim's sociology. In other words, let's talk about Marx and do the same thing with the others. What kind of society does Marx say we are? Who are the groups of people in this society competing with one another? And what kind of culture is produced in this society to make things functional in a sense? The same thing with Weber. What kind of society does it say we are? What kind of culture does this operate by? And what becomes of us, the individual persons? The same could be said about Durkheim. What kind of society does it say we are? What becomes of us, the individuals? And what kind of cultural apparatus does this actually function by? So remember, it's not in the past, not in the future, it's in the now. Okay, so we're talking about how each of them sees our society, and they see and describe our society really completely differently from one another, even though they're looking at the same society both at the same time. This is part one. Part two. Take a side on one of these guys. Which one of them do you think is making a more realistic argument? Remember, all three of them are describing us, but they're essentially against each other more so than they are for one another. So, which one of them do you think has a theory that appropriately represents how we are today? Is it Marx, is it Weber, or is it Durkheim? Now, whichever one you go with, make sure to acknowledge the opposition. Show how the opposition would make a case against you, at the least to avoid with the idea of being accused of being biased. So revisit key concepts. Rationalism versus exploitation. Democracy, we saw the discussion actually had, right? Freedom, are we free or are we not? Morality, are we moral or are we not, right? So these are some key concepts you can actually revisit. Are we going to collapse or are we not going to collapse, right? So address these key concepts and explain how the opposition would make a case against you. And all the while you were to do so, eventually come back and say, well, my guy, still recognizing that the opposition is making a good case, would essentially counter-argue that view, and then explain how your guy would counter-argue, the counter-argument. So make sure, again, to acknowledge the opposition, but defend your guy by also showing how your guy would eventually counter-argue that opposition. Yes, sir?
You want to also explain about
Eventually, yeah. Eventually, I want you to. Well, as you're kind of showing how you're kind of going with the how you're kind of having the counter argument being raised against you, you're still showing why you're actually making this. But if you feel like there's more to be said other than the counter arguments and the way you kind of go against them, you're more than welcome to do so as well. This is the author's name. Yes. Any questions about this? Any questions about the chart at all? Yes, sir. You can draw it. I prefer typed, but if you want to do it by hand, you can. Yeah. So you know how to do charts like this on your computer. It's just setting up tables. It's pretty easy. So if you have difficulty, you can just draw a line if you want. That's perfectly fine also. Okay, so the intention of this is to have you guys revisit the notes you've taken. All the while you go to revisit the notes you've taken, you have to find key concepts you can plug in these. Now, it's not the intention to have you guys get it absolutely right, but it is the intention to have you review the material. Find key concepts you can use to plug in all these areas in a manner as to show how their sociology works. Remember, sociology is how society creates culture, which in the very end actually influences us, the individual persons. Have a good day. I'll see you guys on Thursday as we finish our last discussion right before the quiz we're to have.